I don't have a cold open for this one.
Okay.
We can't start we can't start more than one episode with me saying I don't have a cold open because I think we did that already.
I think we've already done it twice, actually.
Could be. Well,
Did you see Space Jesus yet?
no, because the didn't you get my message?
Oh, because it's
You didn't respond to my message at all. I was
yeah.
expecting you to laugh when I said I just have to stick with Satan.
Oh, I did laugh. I just didn't do it emotically.
Right, right. Yeah, because I went up there and I was there at like 8:30 in the morning and the tabernacle and the conference center were both closed till 10. I was
You
like,
get to
damn it,
meet Space
I wanted
Jesus.
someone to come out and try to convert me. And
Yeah,
there's nobody here,
you'd kind of think if you went to the home base, it'd be 24/7 posted.
right? But I was really surprised because I saw the one statue. There's many statues there, right?
Yes.
They're really into statues. And but the one where it's Joseph Smith's vision and there's two figures that both look like Jesus. Is one of those is Jehovah, right?
Um,
Or don't they say?
I don't know which one you're talking about specifically,
Well,
but
there's a specific like bit of lore where Joseph Smith has this vision where there's like a light and there's two holy figures that tell him
well,
he's
there's
their beloved son or
Moroni.
whatever.
There's Moroni.
Oh, so it's Jesus and Moroni?
I don't think he ever meets Jesus.
So it's Jehovah and Moroni? Or it's just two angels? It was very confusing to me.
I don't think there are two. I don't remember there being two animals. There's just Moroni that he talks to.
Well, in this I sent you a picture of this statue. There's Joseph Smith, like he's like on kind of like sideways, like sitting down, side saddle on the rock with his hand up, and then there's these two figures that both look like Jesus. They're like basically they have beards and robes,
Hmm.
but no wings. There's no angel wings. It's just two dudes that look like Jesus. I don't know what that's about, but anyhow, they're serious about their statues. I can tell you that much.
I don't understand that statue at all.
All right, well,
It doesn't even
I
look like
guess
Jesus. It
I
just
guess they
looks
didn't
like.
indoctrinate you well enough, which is why you left the church.
Well, part of the thing that's hard with all their statues is for some reason they creepily all look like they were made by the same sculptor. Like they're all the exact same aesthetic style.
Which, when we were talking about Morton's list, was cited by you as like a bonus. Like this is all really like stylistically the same, and now you're criticizing
No, it's
the
just weird.
LDS church.
It's weird because it looks like they all use the same models or something. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like it's
right.
just like. But this one looks different, and that's why I wonder if that's Jesus or not. Because first of all, his beard is way too lame. I mean, Jesus should have a formidable beard.
Should he?
I would hope so. And
Oh.
then I think that's Chris Christopherson. I think it's when this I remember this part. This is when Jesus met Chris Christopherson and and introduced him to Barbara Streisand.
Well, I'm gonna have to put the picture in the show notes so our listeners can see it. Cue theme song. Welcome to Your Aleatoric Reality, the podcast that critiques Mormon statues. Thanks everybody for joining us. Give us a 5-star review if you want the show to continue. If you don't, send us an email that says fuck you. You can do that at youraleatoricreality@gmail.com. Or, like make 6 options for what you could say to us in an email.
There you
Roll
go.
for it and send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. This is episode 12,
Yep,
I
I think
think.
so.
And I think we
Yep.
should just do you have any news since last time?
Well, I want to discuss this other picture. What's going on here?
Which one?
The second picture you sent me of statues. It looks like Chris Christopherson is now hanging out with what's his name? The Todd Rundgren. And I think Todd Rundgren is showing Chris Christopherson the way.
I want to take a sidebar to talk about Todd Rundgren for a second. Because for one thing, he seems like a really stand-up guy for like raising Steven Tyler's child as his own.
Mm-hmm.
And she apparently has a really good relationship with him. But on the other hand, every interview I've ever seen with people who have tried to work with Todd Rundgren, they whether they say it outright or not, I get the distinct impression that they think he's a complete asshole.
Hmm.
And like there's this documentary on the theremin. I can't remember the title of it, but it's really cool. If I think of it, I'll put it in the show notes. There's this documentary on the theremin where the interviewer has a bunch of different people. He has like Brian Wilson on, which in the original recording of Good Vibrations, that's not even a theremin. That's like like
Mm-hmm.
a strip thing, a pressure
Yep.
pad strip thing, and not a theremin. But everybody thinks it's a theremin, so they're there's Brian Wilson on the thing, but he also interviews Todd Rundgren. And the way the director subtly told everyone that Todd Rundgren was an asshole was brilliant. He had Todd Rundgren do this thing. He's like, "Can you just do a little thing where you pretend you're working a theremin and move your hand back and forth, like make the sound?" And Todd Rundgren goes, "I better not be doing the only person doing this." And he does it a little bit, and he's the only person in the whole documentary that the guy asks to do that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Is he the one that did that weird prog rock opera that involved him sitting at the top of a pyramid and then they had a guitar made out of ice?
I can't speak to that. It may be. It
Oh my
sounds like
God.
something he'd do. Like he comes across as like really full of himself and pretentious,
Mm-hmm.
even though he's basically just like a a glorified blues player. I don't know, but he did like he got into like cyberpunk and like was really into like electron like the when people first started doing like seriously electronic music and
Mm-hmm.
like the internet and stuff. And I just remember it because he was ripping on Billy Idol because Billy Idol did that album Cyberpunk. And Todd Rundgren was like making fun of him, like, "Oh, you read Neuromancer and now you're Cyberpunk. That's all you have to say about it. You're like,
Right, right, right.
well, what did you do different, Mr. Rundgren? That you read a book too and decided to be a Cyberpunk, whatever."
I looked it
Uh,
up. I looked it up real quick, and yes, yes, it is him. There's a 26-foot pyramid in the middle of the stage, and then they pull this guitar made out of ice with the band logo on it and stuff. But they eventually
uh,
had to stop doing it because it was just too hard to make an ice guitar for every performance. Like they had the mold and everything, but like they're also touring. And so
yeah,
they're like, while they're on the road trying to freeze this stupid guitar, and
that
yeah,
actually makes me respect him a lot because I'm sure numerous people suggested, why don't we just make a guitar that looks like it's made out of ice?
right.
And he was like, "No, I want authenticity. If I'm going to say I'm playing an ice guitar, I want it to actually be made out of ice." That I respect artistically.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah. All right. You're a mixed bag, Todd Rundgren. And if you want to come on the show and call us assholes, we'll be happy to have you. I got a bit of news, believe it or not.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm required to do here in Salt Lake City, I have 9 emergency situation flashcards
Mm-hmm.
that I need to memorize the procedures. And there's like between, like 4 and 8 steps for each different emergency situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've been doing, because I don't want to just like, look at them in order all the time, because I'm going to have, when I'm tested on it, they're going to tell me whichever one they want me to do, and I'm going to have to do it on the fly. So I'm mixing up what order I do them in when I'm working, like practicing them.
Mm-hmm.
So what I have been doing is I go to yar.quest/tools where we have the list randomizer, and I put a list of the 9 emergency situations. I hit randomize, and then I go in that order. So every time I'm practicing my flashcards, I'm doing it in random order, thanks to my JavaScript
Nice.
applet on yar.quest. So it's not a big news item, but it's something I wanted to share.
That's
If you need
cool.
to randomize a list, we got you.
Awesome. Yeah,
All
that's
right.
the stuff you put on there is great.
Well, let's rein it into a topic now, since last time we didn't get to our topic. And it's probably transparently an attempt by me to get 2 episodes out of one recording session. So sorry, Brandon. That's gonna have to be our tagline now. Anytime I do anything half-assed, it's sorry, Brandon. But he's a good sport. I'm sure he's gonna keep listening. So, topic for today. Do you want input on this, Damon, or you want me to just go wild?
We just go wild. Yeah. I mean, you know what? I think mine are sitting there for a while.
Oh man, it went off the table. So I have this little tiny desk in my hotel room, trying to roll with it. Okay, we have random music.
Okay.
And this is going to be tricky because we're going to want to play some clips.
I don't think we have to really.
I think the show will be way better if we include clips.
Okay.
But then we need to work about copyright stuff. I think if we're talking about stuff and we play like just little clips, I think that will count as fair use. Like we wouldn't play an entire composition of aleatoric music, but we can talk about it and play a clip of it.
Right. And well, I think first of all, the people that we're talking about in these scenarios are not the same people that actively sue people on YouTube. I very
Could
highly
be.
doubt that. Um,
I mean, I'm certainly like if anybody hears a clip of their stuff on our show, I mean, we're gonna tell people your name and stuff like your YouTube channel or whatever.
mhm,
So that's that's fair, right? We play a little clip of your stuff. We tell people where to find more.
mhm.
It's win-win,
Okay.
I think. And if anybody sends us a cease and desist, we just cut that out of the episode and re-release it.
Yeah.
But they'd have to be a real Todd Rundgren to do that.
So
So,
I have my notes up from that.
oh, great.
Yep. And so aleatoric music, randomness, random music, indeterminate music, those are all different phrases used to describe music with a chance element, so to speak. And there are
Hmm.
four essentially different types of aleatoric music, right? So the first type is music composed with chance procedures, where, for example, like some forms of indeterminate music are fixed for performers, but the composers use chance operations to compose sections of a piece. So they're just parts of it that are different. It's either in a different order through some mechanism, or they utilize some mechanic to randomize certain structures within the music.
Hmm.
And actually, Mozart used a musical dice game called Musikalisches Würfelspiel or something like that.
Musikalischer Wurfspiel.
Yeah,
Würfelspiel. Best I can do.
to help him choose to write certain measures within his pieces. And there was actually a couple of stories I read about how that game was really popular, and like they would just sit there and roll dice, just keep playing music for like 12 hours.
Nice.
Yeah, it was interesting.
We should definitely throw in a clip from that.
Okay, I'll see if I can find one.
Yeah.
I mostly read descriptions of it. I didn't really. So then there's mobile form. In mobile form, the aleatory elements of a piece are bequeathed upon a performer. A composer provides notation for performers to work with, and the performers may choose how and when to perform that notated music once in the concert hall. So the music is predetermined, but there's no synchronicity to it. There's no, everybody just plays the piece in whatever order they want, whenever they want.
That sounds pretty chaotic.
Yep. But I see, I thought that was a little bit of a cop out, to be honest. Like it didn't feel like, I don't know. So then there's indeterminate notation. In indeterminately notated music, composers eschew the traditional five-line staff with treble clefs, bass clefs, alto clefs, and tenor clefs. Instead, they use graphic notation or text notation to give the players guidance on what to do. This format leads to even more performer discretion than the mobile form of aleatoric music. So they'll just like draw weird hieroglyphs, or I know they use the I Ching was one thing that was done too.
Mhm. Well,
And
when I was in music theory class in high school, I don't remember what it was called, but our instructor showed us a form where it does use a staff, but instead of just being a regular note, it has like the stem and then like a box.
mm-hmm,
And then the musician can play any note contained within that box, which is just another, it's the same idea, but it's just a different way to notate it.
right on. And then the fourth form would be the one that we're most familiar with, which is improvisation over a form, where there's the skeleton of a song, and then people improvise over that song form. So
Like jazz?
yeah, jazz, rock.
No, no. Improvisation is not random. I'm gonna fight whoever wrote that guide. I'm
Okay.
gonna push back. I'm gonna push back on that one. Improvisation is not randomly determined. It's the player with their knowledge of music and theory and the chords and the structure of the song and previous licks that they've heard and that they've come up with. I don't think that could be considered aleatoric music at all. I
Hmm.
disagree. So
I
anyhow,
okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the least aleatoric, but I think improvisation is fair. I think it's fair game. It's not full, but
unless you're just
it's
like you're on a saxophone and you're just kind of like flailing your fingers
right.
without respect of the key or the changes or anything, maybe the argument could be made. But if you're playing what you feel within that mode and over those chords,
Hmm.
that's, we could call it intuitive, but we could not call it aleatoric. In my opinion, my opinion
Okay.
is all, but I feel pretty strongly about that. Because when I think of aleatoric music, the first thing I think of is like computer generated random music, which I used to do when I had my TRS-80 as a kid, and I learned how to program BASIC. And BASIC could make the Radio Shack BASIC could make a pitch where you just gave it a value of 0 to 254 or whatever, two values, one for the pitch of the note and one for the duration.
Hmm.
And it was not respective of keys or notes or anything like that. It was just like within the hearable range of pitch,
Hmm.
you have a scale of like 1 to 255 in there. So the frequencies wouldn't even necessarily match each other harmonically. But I would just set up a little loop that would pick a random number for the tone and a random number for the duration.
Right, right.
There were experimental composers in the 70s that were doing a lot of that as well. Do you have more notes to go through, or because I don't
Yeah.
want to take over if you're on
No,
a
it's
roll?
fine.
Yeah, go.
No, we go back and forth.
Cool.
So like the first for me, the two forms of aleatoric music that I'm most familiar with, and have participated in are modular synthesis and noise music.
Hmm.
Modular synthesis, for those that are unfamiliar, is where you basically take the best example would all the Moog synths are typically modular, but it's where the components that make up a sine wave or a signal, right, that you would normally hear like a flute sound or something like that. There are a series of electronic components that make up that sound.
Hmm.
And what you do is you kind of disassemble them and then make them modular so they interact with each other, and then you play with them, right? And it's just infinite options, but there's no save button.
Uh-huh.
Right? And the cool thing is, depending on, especially now with modern modular synthesis, usually you can either use what's called control voltage, which is what they would use to, it's a measured voltage that represents an octave, right?
Hmm.
But most modern things will also accept an audio signal as a control.
Hmm.
And so you can create these really interesting, and you just basically plug shit together and turn knobs until something sounds cool. And then noise music is just, the technical definition of it I have here is noise music can feature acoustically or electronically generated noise and both traditional and unconventional musical instruments. It may incorporate live machine sounds, non-musical vocal techniques, physically manipulated audio media, process sound recording, field recording, computer generated noise. So they're really taking noise music to really be, I would break that up into several different genres, but so for example, Laurie Anderson would be considered a noise musician according to this.
Well, I don't know if I would buy that. I mean, she has done, she's definitely experimental
Mm-hmm.
with the ways that she makes sounds. I wouldn't call it noise music though.
I wouldn't either. No, that's what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of ambient too that I wouldn't. I mean, noise music seems. I don't know. I always hated that term anyway because it automatically sounds like something that no one would listen to. But
Hmm.
there's you have very aggressive noise music, which is pretty much just feedback, static, hum, distortion, nasty sounds, right? And that's.
That was one of the first things I encountered as at a live show when I first moved to Michigan.
Hmm.
I walked into the Blind Pig in Ann Arbor and I heard this crazy just wall of sound. It was like static and clicking and grinding and it was crazy. And I had come in the door. You couldn't see the stage from the door at that time. And I was like, oh my God, I was expecting to see like people with like purple mohawks and like chains and like explosions and crazy lights and stuff. And I walk around the corner and I look up at the stage and it's just like there's not even any colored lights on it. It's just like a dim light on the stage, and there's these couple of guys that look like bored teenagers with cigarettes in their hand. This is when you could still smoke indoors. And they weren't even doing it. They were just standing there. They had like little folding card tables in front of them with pedals, and every now and then one of them would reach out and tweak a knob.
Yep. Yep.
And it was when I first encountered it, it was so different in my mind from what I thought performatively would be going with that sound. And when I came in and saw this is they've just like set up this electronic thing and they're just tweaking it every now and then. It
Yeah.
was just really, really striking to me. But you've certainly done some of that kind of music yourself.
Well, and the one of the things I wanted to talk about too was so I read I'm a big fan of shoegaze music, right? And that's not really aleatoric music, but it has some elements to it because there are the artifices that are created, the ghost sounds, and so to speak. And I just wanted to talk about. I read all these interviews with like Kevin Shields from My Really Valentine and a couple of other people from that era of music from like the Creation Records era, and they all talked about this thing that My Bloody Valentine used to do, where they would get up and they would just start playing this pattern, and it was the same pattern over and over and over again in a loop. And they would keep playing it and keep playing it and keep playing it until all of a sudden, all the refracted sound, because I mean, this is going through like 7 delay pedals and reverb units and all this stuff, you know, all the most advanced 1990s music gear. And eventually there would be ghost sounds that would be created that would, they describe them as like synthesis ghosts floating across the room in 3 dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, man, I don't even know what that sounds like. I have no idea. And I read about it several times. And then a couple of years later, when I was doing sound at the Elbow Room, I actually had Adam Franklin from Swerve Driver, who was having a very bad tour apparently, because he was playing such a small venue and was really an asshole. But anyway, at the end of his set, he did it. So the band was just vamping on like the last end of the song, and he just took his guitar, put in a loop, hit a couple pedals, leaned his guitar up against his amp, stood there for a second to like make sure it was right, and then he walked off stage and sat down and started having a beer. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? Like, did he just quit? You know, like. And then about 2 minutes later, it was like electronic wails just screaming across the bar, and they were moving on like vertical axes. Like it wasn't like a bipolar sound. It was truly a 3-dimensional sound. And I have a recording of it, and it's not on the recording
Because you could only hear it in the room.
Right. So, you know, when you have all these surfaces reflect against each other and some waves hit each other, they would form these, like, I mean, it's just like, it sounded like in Raiders of the Lost Ark when they opened the Ark of the Covenant.
Uh-huh.
not the sound that made, but those ghosts that like went and scream and came right up to your face, and then, you know, that's what it sounded like. It was like really beautiful but aggressive, and it's hard to even describe. I've never heard anything like it before or since.
Right, because like directionally, normally with music, you have stereo, you have left and right, and the band or the sound man can pan to one side of the room or the other. But what you're saying is that this was the sound could be highlighted or pinpointed like anywhere in the room, and you could hear it moving through the room.
It was aggressively moving throughout the room.
Wow, that sounds incredible.
Yeah,
and it's something you can't record. You have to experience it in person, which is, I love things like that, where in this modern age of like everything's digital and everything's online, things like that can only be experienced in person are like rare miracles, you know?
The only other thing that happened that was similar to that, or that reminded me of it, was they were doing yoga here, and she had these chakra bowls, and they're like, I think seven different bowls that were tuned to the different notes of the chakras. I didn't know this was going on. So I was just sitting here after hours, like probably editing one of our podcasts, and I took off my headphones and I stood up, and there was just this crazy sound, like, and I recognize it or anything, and it was like fluctuating and moving, and I mean, it was not as intense as the other. It was pretty static. It wasn't as directional. But then I went downstairs and I couldn't figure out what direction it was coming from.
Uh-huh.
and finally figured out that it was in this one room where they were doing yoga. But just the way that it refracted and moved through the space was impossible to tell if it was inside the building or outside the building or
Did you feel it in your chakras?
no, I was just confused.
Oh, you're sure it didn't make you like transcend your body for a minute and you were experiencing other, locations?
I'm pretty sure.
Maybe that music healed you.
Maybe.
Because I think you've been a lot more cheerful since that happened.
I don't think so.
Maybe it's because of your dice casting hobby. Maybe
Yeah.
that's been a good outlet for you. Because
Yeah.
you need more of a creative outlet than talking to my sorry ass.
I need a lot of creative outlets.
You do. You're a powerhouse. Anyhow, what do you have next?
Um,
Or do you want me to take a
yeah, go
section?
go for it because I mean I pretty much that's kind of the end of my notes.
Hmm.
I mean I can talk more. I mean I can talk more to my personal experiences with this, but
Well, I've got some examples. I
yep.
called up a list of some aleatory albums as judged by rateyourmusic.com, which doesn't sound terribly authoritative to me, but
No.
it's what I found. Anyway, number one on the list is Brian Eno, so it has a little
Hmm.
bit of cred. Ambient One, Music for Airports, is
Most
cited
famously,
as a Brian Eno album of aleatory music. They've got Apollo 18 by They Might Be Giants on there,
what?
which I'm not sure why. I My first thought was that in the fingertips,
Hmm.
Apollo 18 is the album that has the fingertips, which is like something like 17 super short songs, just little snippets that are like between, I don't know, 5 and 15 seconds. And what people in the like They Might Be Giants fan community did was they would put it on shuffle.
Mm.
And maybe they've talked about it at some point that it was like, oh yeah, they intentionally did it because of the shuffle function on CD players, which was new at the time, and they made this album with those like 17 little snippets, so that in between regular songs would be just this little snippet of something, but it would be different every time. So
Wow.
that's why it made the list because They Might Be Giants specifically did that in order to make it weird when you put the album on shuffle
Hmm.
because there are like the whatever 12 full length songs and then a bunch of like little snippets
Well, that makes
that
me
would
think of.
get thrown in there.
Are you familiar with the Flaming Lips album, Zyreka?
I'm not familiar with any Flaming Lips albums as an album.
Yeah, so it's on 4 CDs, but
Hmm.
they're meant to be played at the same time.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that actually, it's not as good as what he did. So he got a parking garage, and this was, probably like early 90s. So people still had cassette decks in their cars.
Uh-huh.
And as people drove in, he would hand them cassette tapes.
Hmm.
And everybody was supposed to go into the parking garage, park, and then he on a bullhorn would tell people when to start. And everybody would put in the tape and crank their stereos. And each tape was different. And it would create this extremely interesting sound that would kind of resonate and float through the parking garage. And then you could walk around the parking garage and experience different elements of the music that was being created by the cars.
Nice.
So he wanted to do that. Originally, it was supposed to be 100 CDs, but the record company talked him down to 4. Basically
Yeah,
saying,
they were unable to talk Todd Rundgren out of the ice guitar, so they had to rein in the Flaming Lips instead.
they were like, it's hard enough for us to sell a CD that requires you to have 4 CD players. How are we going to sell one or even utilize one that's 100 CDs? And he's like, well, it doesn't matter. It's a concept I have.
Yeah, yeah. Tell that to the bank, pal.
Yeah, right.
Um, so also on the list is Aus den Sieben Tagen by Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, which I haven't heard, but I did play with his grandson.
Musically?
I was in a band that Stockhausen's grandson was in. He was the drummer. After that band broke up, he switched to banjo because he was really into Bela Fleck.
Mm.
But yeah, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen has played around with that kind of thing. Terry Riley is another one of those experimental layout composers. He has an album called In C,
Okay.
like the letter C, In C.
Uh-huh.
And then William Basinski, who I've never heard of before, but he's got a bunch of albums on this list, so that might be worth checking out, such as the Disintegration Loops 3. Well, the Disintegration Loops is also on the list, so apparently that's a series of aleatory stuff that William Basinski has done. Just as some ideas to go out there and explore, dear listener.
One of the things that's interesting too is I think just from a popular music perspective, what comes to mind as examples of aleatoric music are a lot of people listen to movie soundtracks.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's kind of the same thing because it's like designed to accompany a film that you're not watching. So,
This is tickling my brain a little bit because it's
yeah.
almost like the idea of binaural beats.
Uh-huh. Yes, I do. Yes.
Binaural beats can like change your brainwave frequency. You can use it to relax or to meditate or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But how binaural beats works is you have one frequency in one ear and a
Mm-hmm.
different frequency in another ear, and the interference pattern between those frequencies, you don't hear it because you're only hearing one pure tone in each ear, but the interference pattern actually happens in your brain,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how it is able to manipulate your brainwave state. Similarly, to the composer who wrote the soundtrack, it is not at all random because they were following what's on the screen,
Right.
but only to the listener who listens to the soundtrack without having seen the film, it then becomes aleatory in that there's no referent for it anymore. It's just
Exactly.
this collection of things that are unexpected and you don't know why.
And now that I say that, I think it's actually kind of where a lot of ambient music comes from because it's like a soundtrack for whatever, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
music that you kind of actively listen to. It's just meant to incur a mood or make you feel more than it is to be auditorily aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, well, that's a great idea because I have listened to a lot of soundtracks, but I always listen to soundtracks of movies I've seen.
Right.
I don't think I have listened specifically, deliberately listened to a soundtrack of something that I haven't seen.
Or you've got like a horror movie soundtracks are a perfect example where it's just mostly there to build tension, right?
Hmm.
So now
Oh,
you're,
I listen to the It Follows soundtrack all the time. I love that. I love that one.
and then the what made me think of that was I was going to bring up Trent Reznor's Ghosts 1 through 4,
Hmm.
which are a series of really good ambient records that he put together. And the ambient aesthetic has always been my favorite part of the Nine Inch Nails doctrine, right? So
Hmm.
Nine Inch Nails songs were always kind of dual phase, where you had this aggressive, industrial sounding song up top, but then
Uh-huh.
underneath it was like all this really interesting, weird shit that was just going on loops and like, and very ambient. And he kind of just removed the top layer and did a
Hmm.
whole album of just the ambience, which
Yeah.
Downward Spiral is a perfect example of some of the most beautiful ambient pieces that are just going on in the middle of these big rock songs.
Right. It's
You know?
underneath. There's so many layers,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's what makes it like really re-listenable because no matter how many times you listen, you can always notice something you never paid attention to before.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so rich and robust. And we do have to point out that ambient music and aleatoric music are not the same thing. Ambient music being atmospheric,
Mm-hmm.
and aleatoric being specifically having a random element or a random determination to it. They do often overlap.
Well, and so like every time I've ever made ambient music, and I don't know, I can't speak to all composers of music, but it was always completely random. And you just
Hmm.
kind of push towards a place, and then when you found it, you hit record, or you recorded the whole journey. But it was always, I mean, the only composition, at least when I did it, that was done was I want to make it sound kind of like this or feel like this, but it always was more about a feeling or a texture than it was about a song. So that's kind of why I lumped that in there.
Mhm. Definitely. All right. Well, I think we need to issue a listener challenge, and my idea was to maybe we should pick some of the albums we named or the genres because we talked about noise music, we talked
Mm-hmm.
about shoegaze, we talked about soundtracks, and we talked about straight up aleatory. which is a little harder to find. I put down two of my favorite noise albums, which are Time Machines by Coil,
Mm,
which is not aleatoric at all, but it is noise, since we
right.
talked about that to give it as an example. There's also an album by John Frusciante
Mm,
that doesn't have a traditional title, and I'm never sure how to say the title because it's like a colon and two vertical lines. He just like characters.
right, 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 right.
I'm see if I can find it written down here.
And I think it's fair to say, like, I mean, I don't know. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I always, whenever I hear ambient or noise or any of those, most forms of, if it doesn't have lyrics and a hook, I assume it's been completely improvised.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This John Frusciante album. There's two. There's one like a Roman numeral I and
Hmm.
two, which is a Roman numeral two. But the way they're listed is like period I colon for two. One you can't listen to streaming because it's only on vinyl. He only released one on vinyl, and I
Oh,
haven't
wow.
heard it yet. But two is available like on Spotify and stuff like that. So you can put that on your list, dear listener. If you want to just, you know what, if you want to just reach out and hand pick one or a handful of the things we talked about, go for it. If you want to make a list and roll, that would be in the spirit of the show. But we're not the boss of you. You do what you want to do. Listen to some crazy music you might not have otherwise listened to, and we'll have done our job.
Yep.
Because your Aleatoric Reality is the podcast that wants to take you a little bit out of your comfort zone,
Yeah, and
so you
definitely.
can grow.
Yeah, and once you start to explore a type of music that you're not familiar with, and a composer that you're not familiar with, or whatever, then you end up on this rabbit. If you like it, you end up down a rabbit hole, and it adds a whole new element of discovery to your life. So,
Absolutely. Well, in lieu of a quote this time, we should end with a little bit of aleatoric music.
oh, you know what we forgot?
What did we forget?
We didn't roll to see if this was our last episode.
Good point. All right, so we're doing a 1 out of 6 this time.
Yep.
I rolled a 6. So this is not the last episode because I would have had to roll a 1.
Mm-hmm.
But next time it will be 1 or 2.
Yep.
And we'll keep doing that until we're done with season 1.
All right. Cool.
And until then, listener, keep in touch and thanks for stopping by.
Later.
Yeah, so maybe end with something like that.